"You're not welcome at our anniversary party, Evelyn. We think it's better this way." Those were the words my mother said to me 3 weeks before her 60th wedding anniversary, and for a few seconds, I honestly thought I had misheard her. I stood in my kitchen holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring out the window at the maple tree in my backyard. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, but suddenly the world felt gray. "Better this way?" I asked quietly. My mother hesitated, just for a moment. Then she cleared her throat. "Your father and I want something small. Family only. Family only." The words landed harder than she probably intended. I was 67 years old. I had spent decades showing up for birthdays, graduations, hospital visits, holidays, and every family emergency in between. I had driven my parents to appointments when neither of my siblings had time. I had spent countless weekends fixing things around their house after my husband passed away 8 years earlier. Yet somehow, I no longer qualified as family. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to know why my older sister Patricia was helping organize the event, why my nephews were invited, why cousins from 3 different states were invited. But something in my mother's voice stopped me. She sounded rehearsed, as if this conversation had already happened several times before I ever picked up the phone. "I understand," I said, even though I didn't. We exchanged a few polite words before hanging up. Then I sat at my kitchen table for nearly an hour staring at nothing. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. It reminded me of the first few months after my husband died, when every room seemed larger than before. Eventually, I convinced myself not to dwell on it. Families were complicated. People made strange decisions. Maybe there was an explanation I couldn't see yet. Maybe I was taking it too personally. The anniversary party was scheduled for Saturday evening. I spent that day alone. I watered my garden, folded laundry, read half of a mystery novel without remembering a single page. Around 7 o'clock, I made myself a turkey sandwich and turned on the television for background noise. That was when my phone buzzed. A social media notification. Patricia had posted new photos. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the app and immediately felt my stomach tighten. There they were, my parents standing beneath a beautiful white arch decorated with flowers. My sister stood beside them smiling. My nephews were there. Their wives, their children, cousins I hadn't seen in years, family friends, neighbors, nearly 40 people altogether. Family only. I kept scrolling. More photos appeared. A catered dinner, a large anniversary cake, champagne glasses raised in celebration, group photos, toasts, laughter, every face familiar, every face welcome, except mine. I sat motionless while image after image filled my screen. Then I noticed something strange. In the background of one photograph, standing beside my father, was a man I had never seen before. He wasn't in just one picture. He appeared in several. Sometimes beside my father, sometimes beside Patricia, sometimes standing with the family as though he belonged there. I zoomed in. Gray hair, navy blazer, confident smile. He looked comfortable, familiar, important, yet I had absolutely no idea who he was. Then I noticed a comment beneath one of the photos. A woman had written, "So wonderful to finally see everyone together again after all these years." Patricia replied with a heart emoji and a single sentence. "Some reunions are worth waiting for." I stared at those words for a very long time, because deep down, I suddenly knew this wasn't about an anniversary party anymore. Something else had happened that night. Something everyone seemed to understand except me. And for the first time, I realized being excluded might have been the least important secret my family was hiding. I barely slept that night. The photographs stayed with me long after I turned off my phone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that unfamiliar man standing beside my father as though he belonged there. By morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Families drifted. People made strange choices. Not every mystery hid a betrayal. That was what I told myself as I stood at my kitchen counter making oatmeal and coffee. Yet the uneasy feeling remained. Around 10 o'clock, I opened the photographs again. This time I studied them carefully. I enlarged every image. I examined faces, expressions, backgrounds, details. The more I looked, the stranger everything felt. The man appeared in almost every group picture. He was never at the edge of the crowd. He was always near the center. Near my father. Near Patricia. Near my mother. In one photograph, my father had his hand resting comfortably on the man's shoulder. It was not the gesture of strangers meeting for the first time. It was the gesture of people who shared years of familiarity. I opened Patricia's profile and began scrolling backward. Months passed, then years. Most of her posts were ordinary. Birthdays, holidays, family dinners, vacation pictures. But then I noticed something. Every so often, there he was again. Not always clearly visible. Sometimes half hidden in the background. Sometimes standing beside relatives. Sometimes tagged only with a first name. Richard. I whispered it aloud. Richard. The name meant nothing to me. Yet apparently everyone else knew exactly who he was. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. What troubled me most was not his presence. It was the realization that I had never once heard anyone mention him. Not my parents. Not Patricia. Not my nephews. No one. It was as though an entire chapter of family history had existed without me. Around noon, I called my mother. The phone rang 6 times before she answered. Her voice sounded tired. Hello, Evelyn. I hesitated. Mom, who is Richard? Silence. Not the kind that comes from poor reception. The kind people create when they are choosing their next words very carefully. Why are you asking? She finally said. Because he was in every photograph from the anniversary party. Another pause. He is an old friend. The answer came too quickly, too neatly. An old friend of whose? I asked. The family's. I waited. Nothing more followed. For the first time in my life, speaking with my mother felt like speaking with a stranger. Why was everyone there except me? I asked quietly. Her voice softened. Evelyn, please let it go. Let it go. Those 4 words echoed in my head long after the call ended. She did not deny excluding me. She did not explain it. She simply wanted me to stop asking questions. That afternoon, I drove to a small park near the river where my husband and I used to walk. The air was warm. Children played near the playground. A couple sat feeding ducks by the water. Life moved forward as though nothing had changed. I sat on a bench and found myself thinking about Patricia. Growing up, she had always been the favorite. Not openly. Not in ways anyone could point to. It lived in the small things. She received praise more easily. Mistakes were forgiven faster. Expectations were lower for her and higher for me. I spent years convincing myself I imagined it. Years telling myself every family had imperfections. Yet now old memories returned one after another. Missed invitations. Last-minute changes. Gatherings I learned about afterward. Small exclusions that seemed harmless alone but looked very different when placed side by side. As the sun began to set, my phone buzzed. I expected another social media notification. Instead, I found a text message from a number I did not recognize. There was no greeting, no name, just a single sentence. Look closely at the man standing beside your father. Then ask yourself why your sister has known him for 20 years. I read the message 3 times before putting my phone down. The river continued moving quietly beyond the park bench, and somewhere behind me a child laughed as though the world still made perfect sense. Mine suddenly did not. 20 years. The stranger had apparently been part of my family's life for 2 decades. 20 years was not an acquaintance. 20 years was history. 20 years was birthdays, holidays, conversations, and memories. Yet somehow I had never heard his name. I drove home in silence. The text message stayed on my screen the entire way. When I reached my driveway, I sat in the car for several minutes staring at the steering wheel. Then I made a decision. If nobody was willing to answer my questions, I would start finding answers myself. That evening, I opened my laptop and searched through old family photographs stored on external drives and cloud accounts. I had thousands of pictures collected over decades. Christmas mornings, graduation ceremonies, backyard cookouts, anniversary dinners, family reunions. I began scrolling year by year. At first, I found nothing unusual. Then I reached photographs from 15 years earlier. There he was, Richard, standing near the edge of a group picture during a 4th of July barbecue. My father was beside him. I stared at the image. How had I never noticed him before? I continued searching. Another photograph appeared from a Thanksgiving gathering 12 years earlier. Richard was there again. Then a birthday party. Then a retirement celebration. The pattern became impossible to ignore. The stranger had not suddenly entered their lives. He had been there all along. The realization left me unsettled. Even more unsettling was where I appeared in those same photographs. Often I was absent. Other times I had arrived late because plans had changed at the last minute. A few events I vaguely remembered declining because I had been told attendance would be small or informal. Looking back, Those explanations suddenly felt different. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Ethan, Patricia's youngest son. We had always gotten along well. He sounded hesitant. "Aunt Evelyn, are you okay?" I smiled despite myself. "Why do you ask?" "Because everybody has been talking about the anniversary party." I waited. "Talking about what exactly?" Another pause. "About you not being there." I leaned forward in my chair. "And what are they saying?" Ethan sighed. "Mostly that you are upset. Grandma seems worried. Mom keeps saying it was complicated." Complicated. That word again. Families loved using complicated when they did not want to tell the truth. "Ethan," I said carefully, "who is Richard?" The line went quiet. I heard him inhale sharply. Not surprise. Recognition. He knew exactly who I meant. "You know him?" I asked. "Everybody knows him," Ethan replied softly. My heart sank. Everybody. The word echoed in my mind. Everybody except me. "How long has he been around?" I asked. Ethan hesitated. "Longer than I have." I closed my eyes. Ethan was 28 years old. "Why has nobody ever mentioned him?" I asked. This time the silence lasted much longer. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. It carried the careful tone of someone standing near information he was afraid to touch. "Aunt Evelyn, I think there are things about the family that I was told never to discuss." I looked at the photograph still open on my laptop screen. Richard stood beside my father with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "What kind of things?" I asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. "The kind that explain why certain people are treated differently." Those words settled over me like a cold shadow. Because deep down, I already knew he was not talking about Richard anymore. He was talking about me. After my conversation with Ethan, I sat alone in the glow of my laptop screen long after midnight. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock above the fireplace. I kept hearing his words. Certain people are treated differently. Not some people. Certain people. The phrase felt deliberate, careful, as though he had chosen every word for a reason. I closed the laptop and walked into the hallway where framed family photographs lined the wall. For years they had brought me comfort. That night they felt like evidence. I studied them one by one. Christmas mornings, summer vacations, birthday dinners. In almost every picture, Patricia seemed to stand at the center. My parents leaned toward her. Grandchildren gathered around her. Even when she was not speaking, attention seemed to orbit around her. I had never resented it. Families develop patterns. At least that was what I had always believed. But now old memories surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. I remembered being 12 years old and winning a regional spelling competition. My father congratulated me politely before spending the rest of the evening talking about Patricia's school play. I remembered graduating from college. My mother arrived late because she had helped Patricia shop for a new apartment. I remembered introducing my husband to the family. Everyone was kind. But their excitement never matched the enthusiasm they showed when Patricia brought someone home. None of those moments had seemed important by themselves. Together, they formed something larger. Something impossible to ignore. The next morning, I found myself pulling old boxes from the hall closet. Inside were letters, photographs, cards, and family keepsakes collected over decades. Dust covered the lids. I had not opened some of them in years. I spent hours sorting through memories. Most were ordinary. Holiday cards, school certificates, newspaper clippings. Then I found something unusual. Tucked inside an envelope was a photograph I had never seen before. The picture looked at least 30 years old. My parents appeared much younger. Patricia stood between them smiling. And beside my father stood Richard. Not older Richard from the anniversary photographs. A younger version. Dark hair. Same confident smile. Same familiar posture. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded blue ink were 3 words. Family Reunion 1994. I stared at the date. 1994. More than 30 years ago. I was certain I had attended that reunion. Yet I had absolutely no memory of Richard being there. My hands felt cold. I reached for my phone and took a picture of the photograph. Then I sent it to Ethan. A few minutes later he replied, "Where did you find that?" I told him. Several minutes passed before another message appeared. "Aunt Evelyn, I think there are things Grandma and Grandpa never wanted you to know." I immediately called him. He answered on the second ring. "Ethan, what does that mean?" He sounded nervous. "I do not know everything," he said. "But when I was younger, I overheard arguments. Sometimes Mom would tell Grandma that the truth could not stay hidden forever." I leaned forward. "What truth?" "They never said." His voice dropped lower. But Richard was always part of those conversations. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Ethan spoke again. "There is something else." My stomach tightened. "What?" "A few years ago, I accidentally saw documents at Grandma's house. Mom got very upset when she realized I had seen them." "What kind of documents?" I asked. "Birth records." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table. Ethan continued carefully. "I only saw them for a second, but I remember one thing clearly. One of the names on those records was yours." For several seconds after Ethan said those words, I could not speak. I sat motionless at my kitchen table, staring at the photograph in front of me, while 1,000 thoughts collided in my head. Birth records. My name. Richard. 30 years of photographs. Decades of exclusions. Pieces that had never fit together were suddenly scattered across the table in front of me, but I still could not see the full picture. "Are you sure?" I finally asked. Ethan answered immediately. "Yes. I only saw the papers for a moment, but I remember your name because it surprised me." Mom grabbed the folder and told me never to touch it again. I thanked him for being honest and ended the call. Then I sat there listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a lawn mower buzzed somewhere down the street. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. I opened a drawer and pulled out my own birth certificate. I had not looked at it in years. The paper was slightly yellowed with age. My eyes moved across the familiar information. Name. Date of birth. County hospital. Parents listed as Harold Carter and Margaret Carter. Everything appeared normal. Yet for the first time, I found myself wondering whether normal was simply what I had always been told to believe. That afternoon, I drove to the county records office 20 miles away. The building was small and outdated, with faded carpet and fluorescent lights that made everything look tired. I felt slightly foolish standing in line. What exactly was I expecting to find? A hidden answer waiting neatly in a filing cabinet? Life rarely worked that way. Still, I could not ignore the feeling pulling me forward. When it was finally my turn, I requested copies of several public family records. The clerk was polite and efficient. Most of the documents would take a few days to retrieve. I thanked her and left. As I walked back to my car, disappointment settled over me. I had hoped for something immediate. Instead, I was left with more waiting, more uncertainty, more questions. On the drive home, memories kept surfacing. Small moments I had not thought about in decades. Times when relatives seemed uncomfortable around certain topics. Family conversations that abruptly changed direction when I entered the room. Questions about my childhood that were answered too quickly. At the time, I never considered any of it unusual. Now each memory felt like a thread leading somewhere I had never been allowed to go. That evening, another message arrived from the unknown number. My pulse quickened when I saw it. This time there were 2 sentences. "You are looking in the right place. Ask Patricia what happened in 1960. I read the message repeatedly. 1960, the year before I was born. Whoever was sending these messages clearly knew something. The question was why they were choosing to tell me now. I considered calling Patricia immediately. Part of me wanted to demand answers. Another part warned me not to. Every meaningful clue so far had appeared because people believed I knew nothing. If I confronted her too soon, doors might close before I understood what was behind them. Later that night, unable to sleep, I searched through an old family scrapbook my mother had assembled decades earlier. Most pages contained predictable memories. School pictures, holiday gatherings, newspaper clippings. Then a folded piece of paper slipped from between 2 pages and landed on the floor. It was a photograph I had never seen before. A young Margaret stood beside a smiling man outside a church. Written on the back in faded handwriting were 4 simple words. Richard and Margaret. Spring 1960. My hands trembled as I stared at the photograph. Richard and Margaret. Spring 1960. I turned the picture over several times as though the paper itself might reveal more if I looked long enough. My mother would have been 19 years old then, 2 years before she married my father. The photograph was simple, nothing inappropriate, nothing dramatic. Just 2 young people standing close together outside a church, smiling at the camera. Yet the image carried a weight I could not explain. Why had it been hidden inside a scrapbook? Why had I never seen it before? And why did someone keep sending me clues that always seemed to point back to Richard? I barely slept that night. Before sunrise, I was already sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing down dates, names, and questions. The pages began filling quickly. Spring 1960. Richard and Margaret. My birth in 1961. Decades of secrecy. Family gatherings where Richard appeared. The anniversary party. The anonymous messages. When everything was written in one place, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. The county records office. My heart immediately started racing. The clerk explained that some of the documents I requested had been located sooner than expected. I could pick them up that afternoon. I thanked her and spent the next several hours pacing around my house. Every room felt too small. Every minute felt too long. By the time I arrived at the records office, I was exhausted from anticipation. The clerk handed me a thin envelope. It contained several public records connected to my family history. Most were ordinary. Property documents, marriage records, census information. Then I found something that made me stop breathing for a moment. A marriage license application from 1960. Not Harold Carter and Margaret Carter. Richard Collins and Margaret Dawson. My mother's maiden name was Dawson. I read the document twice. Then a third time. The application had been filed, but there was no completed marriage certificate attached. No record that the wedding had ever happened. I sat frozen in my car after leaving the building. Richard Collins. For the first time, I knew his full name. More importantly, I knew that my mother had once planned a future with him. Yet somehow she had married my father instead. That alone did not explain anything. People changed their minds. Relationships ended. Life moved on. But combined with everything else, it felt significant. I drove directly to the public library. The local history department maintained archived newspapers dating back decades. Within an hour, I found an announcement from April 1960. Miss Margaret Dawson and Mr. Richard Collins announced their engagement. I stared at the faded article. Beneath it was a smiling photograph of the same young couple from the scrapbook. My mother looked happy. Genuinely happy. I continued searching. Then I found something even stranger. Several months later, another newspaper item appeared. The engagement had been canceled. No explanation given. No further details. Just a brief notice. I copied both articles and returned home. That evening I spread everything across my dining room table. The photograph. The engagement announcement. The canceled wedding notice. The anniversary pictures. My notebook. Every piece pointed toward Richard. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why had my family hidden him from me specifically? As darkness settled outside, my phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown number. This time there was no mystery. No vague clue. Just a direct statement. You are asking the wrong question. Richard is not the secret. You are. The message remained on my screen for nearly an hour. You are the secret. For words. For simple words that managed to rearrange every memory I had. I wanted to dismiss them as nonsense. A prank. A cruel attempt to confuse me. But deep down, I could not. Too many pieces were already pointing in the same direction. The next morning I woke up exhausted. I had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying my entire life. I kept returning to one question. If I was somehow connected to the secret, why had everyone worked so hard to keep me away from it? Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice sounded tense. Aunt Evelyn, I need to tell you something. I sat down immediately. What happened? Mom found out I have been talking to you. I closed my eyes. That did not surprise me. What did she say? Ethan hesitated. She told me to stay out of family business. Family business. The phrase felt familiar. Growing up, I had heard it many times. Usually whenever questions became inconvenient. Did she say anything else? I asked. Yes. Another pause. She said some things are better left buried. I felt a chill despite the warm weather outside. Better. Left buried. Not forgotten. Not mistaken. Buried. As though the truth had been intentionally placed somewhere nobody could reach it. After hanging up, I drove to my parents' neighborhood. I did not intend to confront anyone. I simply wanted to see the house. The same house where I had spent most holidays growing up. The same house where every major family decision seemed to originate. I parked across the street beneath a large oak tree. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the front door opened. My mother stepped outside carrying a small box. A moment later, another person appeared beside her. Richard. Seeing him in person felt strangely unsettling. He moved comfortably through the doorway. Comfortably through my parents' home. As though he belonged there. My mother handed him the box. They spoke briefly. Then Richard placed a hand on her shoulder before walking toward his car. The gesture was natural. Familiar. Practiced through years rather than weeks. I watched until he drove away. Then I noticed something even more surprising. My father never appeared. Normally, he would have walked visitors out. Normally, he would have been visible somewhere near the front windows. But the house remained still, quiet, closed. I left without approaching the door. I needed answers, not another carefully rehearsed conversation. Later that afternoon, I returned to the library archives. This time I searched for Richard Collins instead of my mother. Hours passed. Most records revealed nothing important. Then I found a church bulletin from 1961. A simple community announcement listing members who had contributed to a local charity drive. Richard Collins was listed. So was Margaret Dawson. And directly beneath their names appeared another entry. Harold Carter. I stared at the page. All three names together. The year was 1961. Before my birth. Before my parents' marriage date listed in family records. Before the timeline I had always accepted. For the first time, I began wondering whether the story I had been told about my family's beginnings had ever been true at all. As I prepared to leave, my phone buzzed once more. Another message from the unknown number. This time it contained no clues and no riddles. Only an address. Beneath the address was a single sentence. If you want the truth about Richard, stop looking at your parents. Start looking at your birth. The address led me to a small records archive on the other side of the county. It occupied an aging brick building tucked between a law office and a church that had stood there for generations. I arrived early the next morning carrying a folder filled with copies, notes, and questions that seemed to multiply every day. Inside, the archive was quiet except for the hum of old air conditioning vents. A woman at the front desk listened patiently as I explained that I was researching family records connected to my birth. She disappeared into the back room for nearly 20 minutes before returning with several boxes and a careful expression. Some of these files are restricted, she said, but there are public documents you may review. I thanked her and sat alone at a long wooden table. Hour after hour, I examined records, newspaper notices, church registries, and county documents. Most revealed nothing new. Then I found a hospital registration index from the year I was born. My name appeared exactly where it should have. So did my mother's. But something else caught my attention. Next to the entry was a handwritten notation referencing a supplemental file. I requested it immediately. The clerk returned carrying a thin folder. Inside was a document that made my hands tremble. It was not a birth certificate. It was an amendment filed several months after my birth. The original information had been corrected and reissued. I stared at the page. Certain sections were partially redacted, but one detail remained visible. My original surname had not been Carter. For several seconds I could not breathe. The room around me seemed to disappear. I read the line again. Then again. My eyes filled with tears I had not expected. Not because I understood everything. Because I understood enough. The story I had been told my entire life was incomplete. I left the archive carrying copies of every document I was legally permitted to obtain. Sitting in my car, I spread them across the passenger seat. One name appeared repeatedly throughout the supplemental records. Richard Collins. The same man from the photographs. The same man from the engagement announcement. The same man who had stood comfortably inside my parents' lives for decades. Suddenly, Ethan's words made sense. Certain people are treated differently. My mother's nervous silences made sense. Patricia's secrecy made sense. Even my exclusion from the anniversary celebration began to make sense. They had not been protecting a family secret from the world. They had been protecting it from me. My phone rang just as I started the engine. It was Patricia. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. Instead, I answered. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, she said, "Mom knows you have been asking questions." Her voice sounded tired. Older than I remembered. Questions that should have been answered years ago. I replied. Another silence followed. Then she surprised me. I told them this day would come. I gripped the steering wheel. What day? I asked quietly. Patricia exhaled. The day you stopped believing the story. I felt my heart pounding. Then tell me the truth. For several seconds, all I heard was her breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. You deserve to hear it. But not over the phone. I closed my eyes. Everything inside me went still. Years of confusion. Years of exclusion. Years of wondering why I never quite fit inside my own family. Patricia gave me an address and a time for the following afternoon. Before ending the call, she said one final sentence. When you walk into that room tomorrow, you are going to meet the person your life was built around. And it is not who you think. The next afternoon, I arrived 10 minutes early. The address Patricia had given me belonged to a small community meeting room attached to an old church on the edge of town. I sat in my car watching people come and go while my heart pounded harder than it had in years. Part of me wanted to drive away. Another part knew I had already come too far to turn back. When I finally walked inside, Patricia was waiting. She looked nervous. Not defensive, not angry, just tired. Across from her sat Richard. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Patricia gestured toward an empty chair. I sat down slowly. Richard looked older than he had in the photographs. His hands rested quietly on the table. His eyes never left mine. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. Evelyn, before anyone says anything else, I need you to know that I argued against keeping this from you. I stared at her. After everything that had happened, I did not know whether to believe her. Richard nodded. She is telling the truth. Hearing his voice for the first time felt strangely familiar. Calm, gentle, measured. The room became very quiet. Then Richard reached into a folder and carefully placed several documents on the table between us. I recognized some immediately. Copies of records I had already found. Others were new. My eyes moved across dates, names, and signatures until they stopped on one sentence. Biological father, Richard Collins. For several seconds I could not move. I simply stared at the page. The words remained exactly where they were. Unchanging. Impossible to misunderstand. Richard was my father. Not Harold Carter. Richard. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, every missing piece fell into place. The secrecy, the exclusions, the awkward silences, the strange treatment throughout my life. Even the anniversary party. All of it connected to one truth that had been hidden for 67 years. When I finally looked up, Richard's eyes were filled with tears. I wanted to tell you, he said quietly. Many times. I said nothing. He continued. Your mother and I were engaged. Then circumstances changed. Harold agreed to marry her and raise you as his own. The decision was made before you were born. Everyone believed it would protect the family. Protect the family. I almost laughed at the irony. A secret that lasted nearly 7 decades had protected no one. It had only built walls between people. Patricia reached across the table. Mom and Dad were terrified you would hate them if you ever found out. I looked at her calmly. Instead, they spent my entire life making sure I never truly belonged. Neither of them argued. Because neither could. For the next hour we talked. Not every answer was satisfying. Not every wound could be repaired. But for the first time, nobody hid behind vague explanations. Nobody changed the subject. Nobody told me to let things go. When the conversation ended, Richard stood. I do not expect forgiveness, he said. I only wanted you to know the truth before it was too late. I studied him carefully. Then I realized something unexpected. I was not angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, certainly. But anger had slowly disappeared somewhere along the journey. The truth had taken its place. A week later, my parents invited me to visit. For the first time, there were no secrets left in the room. No rehearsed stories. No careful omissions. We spoke honestly. It did not erase the past. Nothing could. But honesty finally gave us a chance to stop pretending. As for the anniversary party that started everything, I no longer viewed it as a rejection. Strange as it sounds, it became the event that set me free. Being excluded forced me to ask questions. The questions led to the truth. And the truth gave me something I had never fully possessed before. My own story. For most of my life, I believed I had been pushed to the edge of my family for reasons I could never understand. In the end, I discovered it was never because I was unworthy of love. It was because I was standing at the center of a secret everyone else was afraid to face. The day I learned the truth, I stopped searching for a place at their table. Instead, I finally found my place in my own life.